Thank you, Chair. I have some questions about the new process for listing of terrorist organisations. Firstly, I just want to check that my understanding is correct, that as a result of the machinery of government changes, it's now the Attorney-General who is responsible for issuing regulations under the Criminal Code to list a terrorist organisation?
That's correct, Senator.
And the reason why that's the case is that the Act says that it's the Minister responsible for the AFP which issues the regulations, and the Attorney-General is now the Minister for the AFP, which was previously the Minister for Home Affairs.
That's correct, Senator.
Could you just briefly outline the interaction between the Department of Home Affairs and the Attorney-General's Department in the process of listing a terrorist organisation?
Thank you, Senator. I think I'll ask Ms Chidgey to take you through that process.
Thank you.
So the department works quite closely with the Counter-Terrorism Coordination Centre and the Department of Home Affairs and with AFP and ASIO to support the Attorney-General in making decisions about prescribing terrorist organisations. And ultimately the department's responsible for providing advice to the Attorney following those consultations to inform those decisions.
What role does Home Affairs retain in this process?
So Home Affairs to date has been working to prepare the statement of reasons that then ultimately goes to the Attorney-General with this department's advice as well.
Am I right in understanding that the statement of reasons prepared by the Department of Home Affairs goes first to the Minister for Home Affairs before it then goes to the Attorney-General?
That's been the practice so far.
Yeah. Is there a risk that, given that the Department of Home Affairs has to prepare this for the Minister for Home Affairs and then it then needs to be conveyed to the Attorney-General involving two different ministers before a decision is made, that some delays are introduced into the process compared to under the previous arrangements when it was just one minister who received, considered the advice and made a decision?
That's not occurred, Senator, so we work closely together to ensure the Attorney-General has the advice that he needs to make timely decisions.
I would put it to you that it has occurred already, and to illustrate that I'm going to provide to the committee secretariat some documents for tabling, and I've got multiple copies so it can be provided to witnesses if that's necessary. For background, the documents are submissions to the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security on two recent processes for listing terrorist organisations. I'll just pass that to the Secretariat so it can be distributed to witnesses and anyone who needs it. The two case studies I want to share with you is a previous listing under the old system, under the previous government, which was the relisting of Al-Shabaab, Hamas's Izin al-Din al-Qassam brigades, the Kurdistan Workers' Party, the Lashkar-e-Toiba and Palestinian Islamic Jihad as terrorist organisations. That's a process that occurred in June and July. Of course.
Senator, you said this was a submission to PJCIS?
Yep.
Is it a public document?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And then the second one is the new listing under this new process under the new government, which is the listing of Islamic State Somalia. The key dates in these two processes, as I identify them, are as follows. In the case of the 5 terrorist organisations being relisted by the previous Minister for Home Affairs, the department provided their submission to the Minister on the 25th of June, and the Minister made a decision on the 1st of July, a period of 7 days. The new process under the new government for the listing of Islamic State Somalia, which I note is 1 terrorist organisation, not 5, and therefore a simpler and more straightforward process that should be much quicker. The Department of Home Affairs provided a submission to its Minister on the 18th of the 18th of August, and on the 23rd of August the Minister wrote to the Attorney-General, so a period of 5 days elapsed. Then between the 23rd of August, after the Attorney-General had been written to, a further 7 days elapsed before the Attorney-General Department provided a submission to the Minister, and a further 1 day elapsed before the Attorney-General made a decision, meaning a total period of consideration by ministers is now 14 days for 1 terrorist organisation compared to 7 days for 5 terrorist organisations. It seems clear to me that we've had a blowout of at least 100% in the time taken for ministers to consider it under the new process. Is that a fair summary?
Senator, ultimately the timeframes for the listings were met.
Yes, but that wasn't my question. My previous question before I illustrated these case studies to you was, given that 2 ministers are now involved, isn't there a risk that it will take longer to do a terrorist listing? And you said no, that has not occurred. And I've just demonstrated to you that in fact it does occur. It has double the length of time it takes to consider the listing of a terrorist organisation from when the advice is first provided to when a decision is ultimately made under the new system.
Senator, I suppose one thing I would note is they're 2 case studies, and I accept the timeframes that you've worked through for each of those. In terms of whether they represent standard practice over many years of doing these terrorist listings, I'd probably need to take that on notice and to see what type of timeframes were met over many years. I think with a process like this, obviously the critical thing is to ensure that the minister is in a position to make a decision at the required time if the intention is to continue the listing, and that will always be paramount in our mind. But I think your point as to is it longer now based on 2 case studies, I think I'd need to go back and check some other examples as well.
Sure.
Can I just add one thing here as well, Senator Patterson? This, of course, the example you've given under this government relates to the relisting of Islamic State Somalia as opposed to a new listing. And I think the key point here is that it was relisted before the existing listing expired.
Sorry, just to correct you, Minister, in both instances we're talking about relistings.
Yeah.
Yes, and I think, Senator, my advice to you was that there was no delay, and there was no delay.
Well, there appears to be twice the amount of time taken to make the decision by the relevant minister compared to when the advice is provided and when the decision is made under these case studies. 7 days under the old system, 14 days under the new system, which I think is understandable because we now have 2 ministers involved in the process rather than one.
Well, that's your opinion.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to be generous actually here, Senator Watt, and I acknowledge your point, Ms Chidgey, that there was no a lapse caused in the listing. The relisting occurred in time to continue the listing. But that actually goes to the heart of my concern. This is a very simple and straightforward relisting of an existing terrorist organisation which has been repeatedly listed before. This is the easiest decision that the ministers will have to consider. In the future, it might be a new listing, or it might be more than one listing, or it might be a contentious listing. And if we are taking twice the amount of time to do a listing compared to previously, then there's a real risk that there will be a material delay and that will have an impact on the safety and security of Australians.
Senator, I'd just say that this department and the Department of Home Affairs would ensure we work with our ministers to ensure timely decision making in all these matters, and in the case of these instances, the timeframes were met.
What processes will you put in place to make sure that's the case? Because on the only evidence that we have, which is the only case studies we can compare, because there only has been one relisting so far under this government, it has caused a delay. How will you ensure that doesn't occur again in the future?
I think the Secretary of Home Affairs and I engage very, very regularly and are absolutely committed to the effective collaboration between our 2 organisations. I think Ms Chidgey works very, very closely with the Counter-Terrorism Coordinator in the Department of Home Affairs, and we will always stay focused on ensuring that we meet required deadlines for matters like this. So
I don't doubt that at all, Ms Jones. I'm sure that the public servants working on this are just as professional and diligent as they always have been, but they're now grappling with a process which is needlessly more complex than it was before because of the machinery of government changes made by this government. It now has to go through 2 ministers, not one. So your staff will have to be even better at their jobs than normal to meet the timelines that we were previously able to meet under a more straightforward system. Anyway, I'll leave that as a comment and move on.